Hello everyone, this week is our last week. Today I'm going to spend some time to go through the materials we have learned this semester, and also I will point out some of the key parts of this material and which is relevant to the final exam. Then you can have some focus to prepare for the final exam. And also I will spend a short time to describe the final exam in this semester because due to the different situation this year, so the exam will be different from previous years. So there's no face-to-face exam, so you don't need to come to university. So everything should be complete online. So I will give you some essential information about this online exam. So let's start from the week one. So in week one, the first part is the introduction of the subject, about subject learning guide and the intended learning outcome, and also the subject outline. So you can quickly go through that. We can just skip this part. Then is the introduction to the computing components. So here we just talk about what is data, and what is form of what method to convey information, and what's the definition of the IT the information technology, and why computers is important, and why computer is the center in IT. Then I spent some time to describe the basic concept of the computer, so you should know what's the definition of the computer. Then we'll talk about different types of computers like mobile computers, desktop, and the mobile devices as well. So you need to you need to have ability to tell if this device is a computer or just some other normal devices. Some more computers. And then I talk about this hardware and software in the computer. So you should know what's the definition of the hardware, so what is useful, and what is the definition of the software, what's the relationship between the hardware and software and other part of the system, such as in this figure. So at one we have our hardware, then we have our system software, and on the high layer we have the application software, and on top is our user. Then is the computing components. So in this part, the most important thing is the processor components. So these three components are super important. You should know not only the definition, but also the usage of these three components: control unit, ALU, and the register. And this figure gives you an overview of how these three components work together. So this is a very important part. So then is the machine cycle. So there are 4 steps for each instruction as a machine cycle. So this is important. So 4 steps. Step 1, fetch the instruction data, and then it's the pass to the control units to interpret. Then it goes to the ALU to perform calculations. Then the last is the data and the result storage in the memory. So 4 steps that are important. There's the data representation. So you must know how to convert the binary number to a decimal number, or the other way around. So that's a very essential skills as an IT student. And then it's about the memory. So you should know that what's the functionality of the memory and what's the components in the memory. So about memory address, memory size, and memory types, especially memory types, there are 2 main types, the volatile and the non-volatile. So what's the difference, and which memory belongs to volatile, which memory belongs to non-volatile? So that's a very essential knowledge for the IT area. And then the main memory is the RAM. So DRAM, SRAM, what's the difference? So what's the pros and cons, and what's the 4 steps that help program instructions transfer in and out of the RAM. So this is also important. This room flash memory CMOS. You should know these concepts by heart. There's the memory access time. So for memory access time, so you should know that the speed like the ranking for the different components. So the CPU and level 1 cache, level 2, level 3, and main memory, so which is the fastest, which is slowest. So same for this figure. So for the main memory, different level of the cache, and so what is the typical cycles to access the memory? Then is the buses. So buses is also a very important part for the computer. So you should know the base concepts and different bus type, like a data bus, address, control, expansion, and local. And another two main types. One is the parallel and the serial. And what's the difference? And external as well. And for the bus width and the bus speed, you should notice the basic concept. There's motherboard. So motherboard is you can quickly go through it. So just nothing specific here. Adapter. So you should know what is the adapter card and where we install these adapter cards, and also same for the USB adapters as well. And finally, we talk about the different ports. So at least you should know that different types of port has been used in the computer, and what's the name, what's the usage, what's the difference. Then let's move on to network 2, input and output, and digital storage. So about input and output. So that's the demonstration about what's input and what's the output. Then you should know the definition of the input and what's the typical devices for the input. So there's more input devices. You should always bear in mind. So what is the source data automation? So that's the important part. We should know the definition and in which scenario we can use the source data automation to improve the efficiency. I guess you have discussed that in your tutorial, so you probably still remember that. So that's the important part. Then it's the output. Then for the output, you should know you should understand the definition of the output and what is the typical output device. So we have 4 different types of the output, and corresponding to these 4 different types. So what are the other output devices? First is the display, and how can we evaluate the quality of the display, like resolution, response time, brightness. So you should know all these the basic concepts. Then the printers, what's the different printers, and for each printer, so what can we use for that? And audio, so we have the speakers or headphones, monitors to play the sounds, and also for some other output devices you should always bear in mind. And then let's move to the digital storage. So for the output device, so you should understand what's the typical data storage device for the computer. So what is the definition of the storage medium? So, and what's the definition of the storage device? And here are the important things. So what is the the meaning? What's the meaning of the primary storage, secondary storage, and offline storage, and the tertiary storage? So you must know this definition by heart. And this figure give you the details about difference between the different type of storage, like memory, the secondary and offline, territory. So all these different storage. So it should bear in mind. So that is important. So this we have talked before. So the vitality of the different storage. So which storage device is the volatile, which is not, and the capacity. So here you just need to be careful about the calculation between different like the units, like the kbyte, mbyte, gigabyte, terabyte. So you know how to do the calculation. And here's a very important thing I need to emphasize is the capital B and small b. So capital B means the byte, and small b means the bit. Okay, so if you like look at the different b in your exam paper, please be careful. Is the capital B or small b? Okay, because if you use this capital B as a small b, then you definitely get the wrong answer. Then it's the access time for the digital storage devices. So this figure shows you which device has the shortest access time and which storage device has the longest access time. So the ranking is very important. So you should ask, okay, which is the fastest and which is slowest in exam. So please bear in mind. And for the capacity, and this figure gives you the capacity versus the access time, and for different like the storage type and where should we put in this figure. So please take a look of these figures. I think this figure gives you a very like thorough information about the capacity and access time of different digital storage. So it's an important figure.
And then for the hard drive and the portable memory, so you just need to understand what's the mechanism between the hard disk drive. So how does it work? And for this one, you should understand what is track, sector, cluster means in hard drive. Then it's the solid state drive. So they should tell the difference between the hard disk drive, and the solid state drive. So which is preferred in which scenario, and what's pros and cons for these different storage medium. There's a portable memory, so you just need to know them, like the concepts. No details are required. Let's come to the important parts of the enterprise and cloud storage. So the first important concept is called the RAID. So you must know the definition of the RAID, and also for the RAID we have different levels, and in which level, and then what's the reliability, availability, performance, and capacity in different levels. And this gives you the more explanation about different levels, the RAID 0, 1, and 5. So you must tell the difference between the RAID 0, 1, and 5, or even more. So like for example, in which RAID we have like fault tolerance, which we don't, and which is faster, which is slower. So that's very important part. And then should tell the drawbacks of like different RAID level. And then is the NAS, network attached storage. So this is also very important part. You must know the definition of the NAS and in which scenario we can use NAS, and what's the pros and cons when we use NAS. So that's a very important concept.
Then it's the storage area networks, we call SAN. So for the SAN, you must know the definition of the SAN and compare with the previous NAS, what's the advantage of the SAN, and also try to understand how we deploy the SAN system. And here's also important. So what are the difference between the NAS and the SAN? So if I ask this question, you must answer this question immediately. And then last is the cloud storage. So for the cloud storage, you don't need to know much. At least you should tell the difference between the cloud storage and the normal storage, the normal local storage. So what are the pros and cons for the cloud storage, and what are the characteristics of the cloud storage? Then some other storage devices. For example, the optical disk. So at least you should know what's the definition of the optical disk, and compare with other storage medium, what is pros and cons by using this optical disk. So this you can skip for that, then you can skip. And for the RFID, so this is an important part as well. So what is RFID, and when and where can we use it to improve our efficiency? And what's the NFC, and what's the difference between RFID and MFC? So this is, I would say, also important content. So that's the end of the week 2. Then it's a spreadsheet, part 1. So for the spreadsheet, let's quickly go through this. So for the spreadsheet definition, you can have a quick look. And so this is important, the difference and the similarity between the spreadsheet and the database. You should tell what's the like the pros and cons by using a spreadsheet or a database. So we can continue. So this is something you can have a quick look. It's important, but it won't appear in the exam. And what are the spreadsheet features? So you can have a quick look as well. And then so how to perform calculations in the spreadsheet. So this is important. So you should know that how to do the cell reference in Excel and how to perform the calculations. So it means that if I give you a spreadsheet and give you the formula, then you can tell what's the result. And also, you should also like bear in mind what's the relative cell reference and what's the absolute cell reference, and what's the difference, and how can we what's the purpose of these relative and absolute cell references. And for the functions in Excel or in spreadsheet, I would say you should understand and try to remember all these important or essential functions in Excel, such as the sum and round, average, mean, max. This we got a standard deviation. You can skip for that for now. And what is the especially the if, and all, is very important functions in spreadsheet. And the find, search, and the match. So you can have a quick look. So you don't have to memorize it, but at least you should know how to use that. And the lookups is very important functions. I would say it will definitely show in in exam. So please spend some time to view this VLOOKUPs function. So then how to select range in Excel, and how to do the mathematical calculations. So as I mentioned before, this is very important, and you should always remember how to use these functions. Same for the if and other logical functions. So it's very important. But for the sum if, average if, and the count if, so you can skip this part. And search, and what is the difference between search and find? So you can have a quick look. And the VLOOKUP is very important. So please spend some time to remember the syntax. And if I give you the Excel table and the function, you should tell me the results. So and what's the difference between this true and false? So in this VLOOKUP, we have a specify if it is true or false. So what's the difference between these two different parameters? So that's very important. And finally, the layout and formatting. So for the final exam, you can skip this part. Okay, that's the end of the week 3.
Now let's move on to the week 4, spreadsheet problem solving part 2. So in this lecture, we talk about more things about spreadsheet, like how to create different charts and how to use the scenario and solver to analyze the data, and how to achieve a good spreadsheet design. So for the chart, you should know, so what are the basic chart in the spreadsheet, and what is the usage of each chart? Especially this 5 chart we mentioned in our lecture. So first, you need to understand in which case we should use the pie chart, and what's the pros and cons by using the pie chart. Same with the bar chart. So in which scenario we prefer to use the bar chart to visualize our data. There's a line chart. So it's the same thing. You should understand what's the reason to use a line chart. For example, to show the trend over the time. And you can think about some more scenarios to use the line chart. And then is the scatter chart. And they should understand the difference between the line chart and scatter charts. So in which case we should use the line chart, in which case we should use the scatter chart. So this is very important knowledge you must know. There is a radar chart. So radar chart you can quickly go through. So you can skip this part actually. Then let's move to the scenario and the solvers. So for the scenario and the solver, you should understand how to use the what if this data analysis module. For example, how to use the scenario manager to so what is usage of this scenario manager and why we should use that. Same as well. So why should we use the goal-seek? What's the purpose and what's the advantage? So you don't need to operate this goal-seek in the final exam, but at least you should understand what's the purpose of to use this module. Then is the second part, special design. So for the special design, first is the cell naming. So why we should use the cell naming? So that's the basic concept. Then is the data validation. So what is the reason to use the data validation in spreadsheet? And this part you can skip. And how to protect spreadsheet, you can quickly go through that. If you don't have time, you can pass this content. Some advanced features, for example, the pivot table. At least you should understand why we should use a pivot table and how pivot table can achieve the high efficiency. So you don't need to operate the private pivot table in the final exam, but at least you should understand what's the reason behind it, what's the purpose. So that's the fundamental requirements. And for the VB and the macro, so you can skip this part. So that's the end of this week. So week 5, software, OS, and security. So first is the software category. So this figure is from previous lecture. And for the application software, you should understand what's the definition of the application software and what are typical application softwares in our daily life or in your study or at work. Then is the productivity software. You should at least able to list several well-known productivity software. So same for the enterprise productivity software as well. And then is the graphic and the media software. So same thing as before, you must be able to at least several this type of software. And same for the communication software. Then is the system software. For the system software, it's very important to know that the system software can be divided into different subcategory and BIOS, device drivers, OS, utility program, and the programming languages and other like compiler, debugger, and assembler. So you must know each subcategory. So what is the usage of each category, and what's the definition? So let's start with the OS. So this we can skip. So this is important. You should understand there are 3 different main types of OS: single program OS, multitasking OS and the multi-process OS. So what is the definition and what's the differences between like these three OS? And functions of the OS. So OS, sorry. So you must able to list several functions of the OS. For example, the file management, the memory management. So at least you should understand this belongs to the function of the OS. Then is the multi-user feature in the OS. So this is an important concept for the OS. So how can we achieve multi-user in our OS? So you must know the mechanism behind it. So you can record this figure and think about what's the mechanism behind it. Then comes to the important part, virtual memory management. So you should know what's the reason behind it. Why should we use them, like the virtual memory management? And what's the pros and what's cons? Pros and cons is always important for the virtual memory management. And here is you must know how to achieve virtual management in our computer. So this example give you details about how can we achieve that. So please spend some time to record this example, and because this is an important part. Then it's for scheduling jobs. So for this part, you just need to understand the scheduling jobs, why it's important and why we need that. And for these different scheduling algorithms, you can skip that for now. That's spooling. So same as before, you must know the definition of the spooling and try to. So here's the example. So you can able to list other examples to explain how to use spooling in our IT. Then is the BIOS. So BIOS is one important category of the system software. So you can name the different functions of the BIOS and give a brief explanation of each function. And for the device driver, same as BIOS, just need to know the definition and the reason behind it, why we should use the device driver. So for the utility program, same thing. You should give the definition and you can list several well-known utility program. For the programming language, you can explain this figure. So how this high-level programming language is translated to the binaries. So you should understand all this process. So that is the important part. Then comes to the digital security. Then for the digital security risk, you should understand the definition of the digital security risk and can name the one or two of the risk and give details of each risk. So that's the basic requirements. And for the malware, so for the malware, you need to understand of a different category of the malicious software, like for example the virus, the worm, the Trojan horse, the rootkit, spyware, ransomware, and adware. So you must understand the different differences between this malicious software and what is the features of each malware. So that's the very important part for the security. And for the botnet, so what is the definition of botnet, and how harmful is the botnet? How attackers can use the botnet to attack our system? So that's the fundamental requirements. And you should give the definition of the denial of service attack. And for this different attacks, you can skip that. Then it's the DDoS. So DDoS, you also need to give the definition and give the reason that why this DDoS is hard to prevent. Same for the backdoor. So what's the definition of the backdoor risk? And then same for the spoofing. So why spoofing is dangerous? So what is the behavior of the spoofing? For example, the IP spoofing and the email spoofing. So what's the difference? There's the protection, antivirus software, and the firewall. So you just need to know the definition of this antivirus software and the firewall. So what's the features? What's the functionalities of these two different types? You don't need to give the examples of this software. Then is the unauthorized access and use. So what is the unauthorized use? And what is the then is the unauthorized access and use. So you should give the definition of the unauthorized use and unauthorized access. And then what is the access control? And how can we achieve a simple access control by using different technologies? You should able to give the examples. And for the software protection, so you can just describe how can we achieve the software protection by using different methods. And this is an important part. So how can we achieve encryption? And what's the difference between the symmetric and asymmetric encryption? And what is the digital signature? So what's the definition? And what is the digital certificate? So you need to give the definition of these two different concepts. So last is the hardware thief. So you can skip this part. So yeah, you can skip this part as well. For the wireless security, at least you should understand how can we. So what's the mechanism to achieve wireless security? For example, using the encryption and password, and how to achieve the MAC address control by using Wi-Fi. So that's the end of this week. So then is the week 6, data communication and the networks. So let's start with the data communication. So you should understand this the basic general block diagram for the data communication module. And like different module in the data communication network, the source, transmitter, communication system, receiver, and destination. And what are the three fundamental characteristics of the data communication? Delivery, accuracy, and timeliness. So these are 5 components we just mentioned that. And I just want to mention here, you need to understand the definition of each component, especially the protocol. So what is the protocol? So these are important. So what are the different transmission mode? Simplex, half duplex, and full duplex. So what's the pros and cons of each mode? And you can give some example in each mode. So that's the very fundamental knowledge. Then is the data transmission forms. You can tell what's the difference between the analog transmission and the digital transmission, and why in which case we can use the analog, and in which case we should use the digital. And for the AD and the DA converter, so you can skip this part. And for the different cables, this is a very important part. You're able to tell the difference between like different cables. So you must give the pros and cons in each type of the cable, twisted pair, coaxial cable, optical fiber. So pros and cons, very important. Then it's for the wireless. So for the wireless, you just need to know and what's the characteristics of the wireless signal. For example, if the frequency is low, it means it can easily penetrate the object, and easy to transfer in the further range. When the frequency is high, it means it's hard to penetrate the object, but then it means that we can achieve a high bandwidth by using the high frequency. So that's the fundamental things you should know about this wireless communication. There is the data transmission speed. So this is important. You need to be able to understand what's the definition of the bandwidth. And if I give you some question, you can calculate what's the bandwidth. So bandwidth is usually like bit per second, not like not the capital B, but the small b. So during the calculation, you should always bear in mind the difference between the byte and the bits. Then is so this is an important table, give you the difference between different cables. So you must bear in mind of this table. Then comes to another important part, data transmission method. So asynchronous methods and synchronous methods. So for the asynchronous methods, so why it is important, and what is the the frame look like? Start bits, data bits, battery bits, and store bits. So what is the usage of each bit? And how do you calculate the transmission efficiency of the asynchronized transmission? Same for the synchronized transmission. So how can we achieve the synchronization between different parties? And why we don't need the start bit and stop bits? And same thing here. How can we calculate the transmission efficiency by using synchronous transmissions? So this table is also important. Give you compare the different transmission methods. And the same here, and how to achieve different efficiency by using different transmission methods. So how to calculate the transmission method is very transmission efficiency is very important. Then is the data communication hardware. So you must understand what's the usage of these different communication hardware. For example, the wireless modem, and for the wireless access point, and the router. So why should we use router? So just need to understand the basic concept. You don't need to go to the details of each hardware. Same for the network cards as well, and the hubs and the switches, and what the difference between the hubs and switches. So that's an important concept. Then let's move on to the computer networks. So for the computer networks, you should give the reasons why we should use the network to connect all the computers. So different types of networks. So what is the LAN, what is WAN, and others, network type, you should give the definition. And this two network architecture is very important, client and server, and peer-to-peer. So you can tell me if I give you a network topology, you can immediately tell me what kind of this architecture it is. And the network topology, very important part. You need to able to draw the different topology if I give a name. So for example, if I give you this topology, you can tell me what is topology and what is pros and cons of this topology. So for the star, ring, bus, mesh, they're all important topology. So please spend some time to understand the different topologies, and in which case we should use this topology and that topology. So that's a very important part. Then for the network standards and protocols, you must give the definition of the standards and protocols and why it is important in our computer networks. And same as here as well, you must able to list several functions of a protocol. For example, by using protocols, we can specify the size of the data package, and also it can provide errors and flow control by using the protocols. So you must understand all these different functions. It's very important. And the OSI module, always important. We will, I mentioned many times, you must know, like fully remember this OSI module. Not even my class, in the future, when you go to the networking subject, this is very important. You don't need to tell all the layers, but at least you need to focus on the physical layer, data link layer, network layer, transport layer, and application layer. So you can skip these 2 layers. So for layer 1, so about physical layer, so what can we do in the physical layer? And for the data link layer, so what is the usually functions on this layer? Same for the network layer. For example, we can use IP protocols on this layer, and we can start to route the package on this layer as well. And then the transport layer. So on the transport layer, there are 2 very important protocols, TCP and UDP. Then is our top layer, the application layer. So what are the usually protocols there? For example, the HTTP, FTP, SCMP, they are famous application protocols. Then about several popular protocols in our computer networks. So first is the Ethernet. You need to understand what's the basic concept of the Ethernet. So what's the general speed for the Ethernet? So for token rings, you can skip this protocol. And the TCP/IP protocol is a very huge protocol. So I don't expect you to understand the details of this protocol, but at least you should know that this protocol is not only just a TCP and IP protocol, it's a suite of the communication protocols. So it contains a lot of protocols like IP, ICMP, TCP, UDP, HTTP. So they all belong to TCP/IP protocols. So this figure shows you how to use the TCP/IP protocol to transmit the information. So especially from different layers. So what is the package? What does package look like on different layers? So that's an important part. There's Wi-Fi. So for Wi-Fi, you don't need to understand details. Just only need to understand what is the frequency band used in different generation of the Wi-Fi. So for example, 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. And also what is the typical speed of each generation. Same for the Bluetooth. So what's the frequency band and what's usually the rate, data rate. So for the RFID as well. So what is the range, the communication range of the RFID, and what is the frequency as well. So you don't need to go to details. And same for the NFC. So as I mentioned before, you must understand, you must distinguish the RFID and NFC. So what are the differences between RFID and NFC? So you don't need to go to the details of these 2 protocols as well. And for the 1G until 5G, you can skip this part. And last is the internet. So you must know the definition of the internet and why it's important for our daily life. So what is the definition of the ISP? So what is IP address and what is domain name? So that's a very fundamental knowledge for our IT subject. So what is DNS server and how can we transfer the domain name to IP address? So that's an important figure. So please pay more attention on that. Then is the World Wide Web. So what is the definition? And same for the HTML. So we'll focus on later. So you don't need to look at it here. So what is the web page address consists with? So you need to give the different names of these components or these different parts. So this is important. And for different site generations, so we can skip this part. And last is the internet services. So that's very, we say, fundamental. So you can skip this part. So that's the end of this week. And then is web design. So for the web design, first, this figure is important. You should understand for the web design, there's a front end and back end. So what's the difference between front end and back end? And for the front end and back end, we have different technologies. So we have the HTML and the CSS for the user interface. We have the JavaScript to add some interaction. Then we have the PHP to achieve the server communications. Then we have the Apache, this server. We can analyze the data. So this is important. And then what is the simplified steps for developing a website? So this is important as well. For the tools, you can have quick look. Same here as well, you can have quick look. And you can skip this as well. So for these three different concepts is very important. So what is the HTML, what is the CSS, what is JavaScript? So, and how can we use this different technology in our web design? So then for this HTML different generations, okay, you can skip this part. Then comes to the important part. HTML is built on the document object model. So this figure shows you the structure of the web page. So important. So this just gives you some fundamental knowledge about this architecture. So you can quickly go through that. So you can quickly go through that as well. And this is also important part. So in the web page components, we use tag. So there are two-sided tag and a one-sided tag. So you need to remember. So in what tag is a two-sided, what tag is one side. So that's important. So for the headings, at least you should know that the different numbers means different level. And for paragraph, it means the P. For the paragraph tag, then you should remember how to change the format of your text in the website. Then list, so UL means the unordered list and OL means the order list. So that's very fundamental knowledge of web design. Then tables, you're able to tell how to draw a table by using HTML language. So this is important. So this is important. Like, for example, if I give a code, then you can like draw the tables according to the code. So that's very important. And same as here, so how to span the cell in the table, very important. And for the image, you must remember the syntax of the image, this language, very important as well. So for the image syntax, what's the different component or parameter in this image element, source, alt, and width and height. So this hyperlink important. So how can we include the hyperlink in our web page? So you should remember this, how to achieve this hyperlink in the web page. Then for the comments and special characters, you can skip this part. So colors in the web page is important. You should know that we can use different methods to change the color of the web page. For example, you can directly use the hex value, or you can use we can use the RGB this array to change the color. So very important. There is the web page design guideline. So you can quickly go through that. So then just how to copy your web page to server. So so that's the end of this week. Then it's week 8, web design part 2. So in this lecture, we talk about how to use CSS in our web design. So then you should give the reasons behind it. Why this CSS is important in the web design. And there are 3 different types of the CSS. So this is important part. You should give the definition of each type and the usage of each type. So inline type, so just directly into the element, and the internal style, so it will be declared in the header. And for the external style, so we have a separate this CSS file to change the style of the web page. So that's 3 different types of the CSS, very important. Then you should remember the style is applied downwards. So important, you must remember that. Then is the CSS selector. So you must know the syntax by using CSS. So same as before, so how to change color in CSS and how to change the font. And this you can skip. You can skip that as well. Yes, skip that as well. So list. Then how can we change the property of the list? You can have a quick look on that. Same for tables. And the ID selector is important. So why we should use ID, and what's the way and what is the way to use ID selector, and how to use the class selector, and what's the difference between the ID and the class selector. So this is important part. So all this you can skip. So then is the meta element. So what's the definition of the meta element in the web design? Then what is cookie? So this is very important part. So why should we use cookie? And by using cookie, what things can we achieve? And what's the security features of the cookie? So very important part. Please spend some time on that. And for the XML, so you should know the definition of this XML and why we should use this language. And for Johnson, you can skip that. So that's the end of this lecture. Then is the IT professionals and ethics. So this lecture, there's many concepts. For example, what is the organization? What's the pressure of the organization? You should bear in mind. And what's the information system? And what is computer-based information system? So you must know the definition. So what is the information technology infrastructure? So if you can explain this concept as well. So for this one, you can skip. And for the ERP and the DMS, you can skip that as well. So all these information systems in the enterprise, you just need to know the name. So you don't need to go to details. So for the IT career, so you can skip that as well. Let's skip that. Then it's the ethics and the society. So in this part, you should be able to explain what is the technology ethics and why is it important, and like which technology we have these ethics issues, and how can we make things better by using this technology. So this is important. You need to explain that. And also for the IP as well. So what is the definition of the IP and how can we protect the IP? So you must give the reasons. The same for the code of conduct. Why is it important? And what it's about? So then for the green computing, so you just need to know the concept. That's fair enough. So finally is information privacy. So in this part, you just need to understand what's the definition of the privacy and how can we protect the privacy in our daily life. So you don't need to go to details of all these parts. So that's the end of this week's lecture. So from week 10, we spent 2 weeks to explain how to use database. So here, I won't go through the slides page by page. I will directly jump to the important parts. So this is important part. You need to be able to give the definition of the database and able to list several functionalities of the database. And this table is also very important. You need to be able to tell the difference between the spreadsheet and database from different angles. And then for the types of the database, you need to understand like each types and give the definition. So that's the basic concept. You don't need to go to details of all these different types of database. Then in the database design, you must able to give the definition of the primary key and the foreign key. So if I give you a database, you need to point out which one is the primary key and which one is the foreign key. So that's important. Then for the queries in the database, so the most important thing you need to remember is to set the record criteria. For example, if I give you like the requirements, how can you set this criteria in the database? So you should always remember that. For example, if you want to specify the dates and order, how can you achieve that by using the access? That's very important. Same as well, how to use the and or in the database, and how to do the sorting in the database is also very important. And this is also very important. So actually, by using the access, you just achieve the database by like click different elements, but actually there's a SQL language behind it. So you must understand like the different language. How does it mean? Select from, where, and order by. So what does each keyword mean? So if you don't know, go back to database, change to the this language, and try to understand what's the different keywords mean. So that's the end of this lecture. Then is the database application 2. So same as before, I will directly jump to the important parts. So if some part I didn't mention, it means that you can quickly go through that or just skip that. So for the database form, you don't need to go to details because you already use access to generate the forms. So here you just need to understand why we should use forms. So for exam, you don't need to go to details. Then for the database report, so the most important thing is that if I give you a design view of the database, then you can generate the corresponding report. So if I give you this, then you can then I will give you some information about like different student names. Then you can draw the reports. Here's for example, the department, like the ID and names, and with the head, with header and the header names. And then it's the student's first name and last name, and major names. And then it's the count. So equals count student ID means how many students in this category. So for example, here it means 5 because we have 5 students here, and then we have different departments. So you can draw the report, including all the different like department with all the student number, and then you can able to fill in the counters as well. And then same for this the page footer. So what does this equals now mean? So just if you don't remember, go to your database check the design view, and then how to generate the report based on design view. So that's very important part. Then is the big data. So for the big data, you should be able to explain the characteristic of the big data 3 ways: volume, velocity, and variety. And then for the AI, you just need to know the definition of the AI and to explain how does it work. That will be fine enough. So there are steps. So this example gives the steps, how for a machine to distinguish between cat and dog. So you can have a quick look, and then you can able to list some examples in our daily life by using AI. So that's the end of all the lectures. Then I will spend a short time to explain our final exam. So in this term, we need to have this final exam online. So the time of the final exam will last for 30 minutes plus 2 hours. So 30 minutes is for reading, and 2 hours is for your writing time. So this 30 minutes will be used for the readings, and also maybe there's some network delay. So then I will give you some extra time for you to finish your exam. So the whole exam will have 100 marks. So it has 2 main parts. So part A and part B. So in part A, you will have the multiple choices. So for each question, there's only one correct answer. So there's only one. So please bear in mind. And there will be 40 questions in this part. So if it has a simple questions and have hard questions. For simple question, it only has a 1 mark. If it's this question is a little harder, then it has 2 marks. So that's the multiple choice. Then in part B, we have the short answer questions. So if we have the 6 multi-part questions, it means that we have the 6 the big questions, but in each question, it may have several sub-questions. So for these multi-part questions, so the marks will from 6 to 40 marks, depends on the difficulty of these questions. So you can like directly answer the question in the online. So just type in your answer. So that's all about our final exam. So if you have any questions, just please let me know. So I will be online during the tutorial time. So you can talk to me during the tutorial time. So please get ready for your exam. You need to summarize the contents for the subject. Then you can go to review all the weekly review questions and quizzes, which in the MS already. And then you can do some practice in the multiple choices questions online for the quiz. And then you can do some practice of the short answer questions. So for the short answer questions, we have practice in our tutorial. So in each week for the group discussion. So just like that, I will give you some question, then you can explain the solution to me. But in the final exam, the question will be very different. So in more details, it's not that general. So I will give you some more detailed questions, and some may require calculations. So that's the major difference between these short questions in the final exam and the tutorial. So as I said, if you have any questions, please join the tutorial in the afternoon so we can talk about that. Thank you so much.